Well, today we're talking food pantry and storing food. We talk about storing food for long times, but what are 10 ways that we can put food up and know it's going to last a long time? We're going to talk about 10 things you need to be purchasing and buying today to put your food up to make it last longer and take care of your family. Today's video is going to be a good one, and it starts right now. Hey guys, welcome to the Max. So as you see, we are in one of the dark rooms and in one of the pantry areas. So the lighting may not be the best in this video, but that is one of the points of food storage we'll talk about as we get into the list. But if you're new to the Max, go down here, press subscribe, ring the bell. There's always good content here that we're hoping to teach you to get wise in taking care of your family when it comes to homesteading and prepping. So let's jump right into the list. Number one, when it comes to food storage, is where you're putting your food. So before we talk about storing it, let's talk about the areas that we're storing it. So number one, if you can put your food in a cooler or room temperature style room, so 70, 75-ish, even a little cooler, that's not going to hurt anything. It needs to be in a controlled environment where your temperatures are not changing much. Also, it needs to be darker for long-term storage. You've seen a lot of our shelves. If you go back and watch some of our prepping videos and some of the ones where we're showing our stockpiles and showing like our pantry tours, a lot of those are in light. Well, a lot of times those foods are the ones we're rotating and eating on a yearly basis, the ones we're actually actively eating. But when it comes to long-term food storage, like for instance, the room we're in right now, there's no windows, there's no excess light, other than the one light that we turn on to access the room. It actually stays dark pretty much all the time. If we come up here, it's 5 minutes in here, grab the few things we need, and we're out. So for 23 hours or plus, it's dark. That will help your food last longer. So that may not be a room, that may be a closet, that may be under the bed. But what I am saying is keep it in a cooler, darker area that doesn't have a lot of light exposure. And we're going to jump into some other options that will help you control the light too. Number two would be food grade buckets. Now you see these, I have tons of food grade buckets sitting here with food. So anything from our wheat to our flour to our sugars, all those things go in food grade buckets. We make sure we find food grade buckets. Now, here's the key. When you're finding the food grade buckets, the buckets are not as good without good quality lids. So there are some buckets back here that if they have honey, we have a lid that does pop closed and it does close off, but it's not airtight, fully sealed gamma lids because we are utilizing that honey quicker, and honey does not go bad as long as it's covered and sealed up. So we don't use a gamma lid, or we don't use one with a rubber gasket. We just use ones that truly snap close. Don't put any pressure on those kind of lids because those lids will pop open. But if we're doing salts, if we're doing things that we're not worried about, like bugs getting in, we may use those kind of lids. Now, when we're talking about long-term storage, putting up flours, putting up sugars, putting up things that rats and bugs want to get into, you need a good quality lid. You need to make sure it has a rubber gasket or a seal or a way to close and lock down to where you can't just pop it off. So make sure you're getting food grade buckets, but make sure you're getting good quality lids when it comes to number two. Number three is MYLAR bags. Now, MYLAR bags is something we talk about a lot. You see some right there. That is the 5-gallon version of the MYLAR bags. We have a lot of our flours and sugars in as well. If we are wanting to not use just food grade buckets because we're looking for space, MYLAR bags may be the best answer because you can stack them. Once you seal them off, you can stack them. Right here on this shelf, there is over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 big 5-gallon containers right there of MYLAR bags. Now, if you look behind me where we have all these buckets take up a lot more room for maybe 12 buckets. So if you have the space, the buckets, I like the buckets. However, if you don't have the space, putting MYLAR bags and utilizing them and sealing them, stacking them on top of each other is key. Look right here beside us on this side. In this bucket, now, and we're going to talk about containers in just a second, but in this bucket, we have MYLAR bags. There is meals upon meals upon meals right there in that container, but they stack tightly, and how you put your food up, of course, matters too. For instance, dehydration and freeze drying, but those stack amazing where you can put tons of meals in one little container. If you're needing to put it under beds and you don't have rooms like we talked about, buy flat containers, slide them in, and that way you can put your MYLAR bags in them. This container is, you can see through it. So these are not the containers that I would tell you to utilize unless you have them in a dark room. Now, for instance, we have these in a dark room, so it's not such a big deal. However, I want to show you some more buckets. Now, if we are going to put these in downstairs, for instance, or we're going to not have a room that doesn't have windows in it, maybe it has a lot of light and a lot of windows, you need to look at two different style buckets. Again, guys, we're in the dark. This is why we like this room. Closed off containers where they cannot be pinchable with light. They close, they have no gaps in them. Also, this is some of the ones we get from My Patriot Supply. These little Ready Hour 3-month kits are phenomenal. If you're buying Christmas this year, these are not a bad purchase because food is going up in price, and it's a good way to take care of your families and have freeze-dried foods for 25 years. But for instance, these containers allow you to have food storage without any kind of light. Light, air, moisture, all those things are terrible for food storage. So if you can put them in darker containers, that's better. If you have some more like ours right here, you need to make sure you put them under a bed, put them in a closet, put them up in an upstairs room like this that has no natural light coming in, and artificial light is not always pushing in here. It's very good to keep them for sure in the dark. But if you have the other containers and you don't have anywhere else to put them, make sure you have the darker containers that's not clear on the outside. Number 4, 5, and 6 go together. So we're going to jump into 4. First being cans. So we can a lot of food. So you need good quality mason jars, either quart, pint, half quart, half pint, half gallon. But you need to learn to can. Canning is a good thing. It allows you to put up food without having to worry about refrigeration. So a lot of our vegetables this year, about 95% of them, we put in cans because we wanted to get them out of the freezers. Now, we love freezers. We love being able to get stuff out of the freezer and go straight into cooking. I love, actually, they taste better to me from the freezer if I don't eat them straight fresh. But we're talking about food preservation and we talk about safety of food to last longer. Having canned food is key. Now, if you're not canning your own food, you can buy canned food. But I would challenge you to learn how to can, learn how to use quality good lids. There's several canning lid companies we like, a lot of jars. We'll link those below. But ultimately, you need to learn how to can. Canning holds food for a long time without the grid. That is what's so key with that. Now, if you can keep those and you're talking long-term food storage, you need to keep them in the same rooms. For instance, we do have some canned goods here in this room that keeps it dark. For the most part, our canned food is downstairs in our pantry or literally in our kitchen. It's getting a lot more sun than I would particularly say you need to have for long-term canning. However, because we are a big family, because we're a family of 8, and because we're eating all the time, and because we're rotating and growing new gardens, they're never on the shelf longer than just a few months because we're rotating them out. So we may have 2 to 3 to 4 years worth of canned goods storage, but because we're rotating so heavy and replacing so heavy, it's not that big of a deal. Now, we do keep our meat and our lard in a little bit more of a darker space, and it does not get exposed to light a lot at all. But when it comes to like our canned vegetables, it's not a big deal because ultimately we're eating them quick. But if you are wanting this, like if you're getting this massive load of peas or this beans and you're wanting to can and let them last for years and years, keep them again in a darker spot because that glass is clear. There's no way to really protect it. And the longer it sits in the light, it may not last as long as you want it to. So number 5 goes along with that, reusing some of those same lids and cans. So here's parts of our pantry where we put a lot of our dehydrated and freeze-dried herbs and spices and vegetables up through using reusable cans. Now, the purpose of this is you're being a good steward. You're recycling things that you can utilize. Now, this will last a long time because it's been dehydrated and freeze-dried. And it's an easier way to store because we can stack a lot of these because they're not in a quote-unquote sealed situation. Again, we keep these. If we're using them pretty heavy, they'll stay in the kitchen and we rotate. If we're not using a lot of this, we stack them in this pantry. This pantry is also dark, and so we don't have to worry about light just being exposed all the time. So having glass, for instance, to reuse is good too. You can't can with the lids again. You can with the glass, but you can't can with the lids again. So you can utilize them in other ways. If we're putting up milk, if we're putting up elderberry syrup and we're just using them in the fridge, that's great. If we are turning around and putting our herbs in them and things like that, we can place them on the shelf and they will last a long time. Plus, it also is easier to stack and put on a shelf to last a little bit longer. As I said, number 4, 5, and 6 go together. So number 6 would be AUBURN glassware. So anything that is darker, it helps keep the things in it a little less exposed to the elements like the UV rays. So for instance, when we're making tinctures, when we're making kombucha, when we're making any kind of things that we're wanting to ferment, any of those items we are putting in AUBURN glassware. So if we're making vanilla, we're going to have those in AUBURN ware. If we're going to make the kombucha and let it sit out, it's going to be an AUBURN ware. Especially with our tinctures and with all our medicinal herbs, they're going in AUBURN ware. That helps us keep it in a little bit more controlled environment when we're talking about food and medicine storage, because there may be times, like for instance, when medicine is at a shortage, by having these things in a little bit more of a controlled environment, such as keeping the UV rays off, it will allow it to last longer and it will be better for your health to go in the long haul. So making sure you're fermenting, making sure you're putting up your liquids and also maybe your tinctures in AUBURN glassware is key. Number 7 is oxygen and moisture absorbers. Now we put this in everything. We believe in these things. Every one of these long-term food storages, every one of our reusable, recycled cans that we're putting dehydrated herbs in for long-term storage, down to our seed vaults where we have a lot of our seeds, even down to our ammo cans. All that we keep moisture controlled absorbers and we keep oxygen absorbers in those. It is good to make sure you keep your moisture and your oxygen to the lowest point levels when you're talking about keeping stuff for a long period of time. For instance, in these buckets, I may have 2 or 3 oxygen absorbers. It all depends on the size and the quantity of what you're putting in those buckets. Now, we also put them in the MYLAR bags, especially if we're looking long term. Now, say for instance, we're freeze drying some fruits and it's just more snacking, or we're using herbs and we're going to be using them through the month or the next 2 months or 3 months. I'm not going to waste my oxygen absorbers for that. However, if we're looking long term, we're putting up food in containers for years and years and years to come, we're using oxygen absorbers especially, and moisture absorbers. Both the things are good. Pick them up. A lot of times if you're purchasing MYLAR bags, you're actually getting those as part of the bundle. So make sure you're purchasing good quality MYLAR bags, but buying these oxygen absorbers to go along with it, or moisture absorbers, just depending on what you're putting up. Again, goes down to your firearms, your ammo, your money, your cash. The moisture makes all that just ruin. Put oxygen absorbers in just about everything that you have for long-term storage. So this goes along with our water too. Number 8 would be water storage, making sure that you have water. Now, there's a few ways to do that. If you're talking using water and making sure you have enough in abundance, you need to look at the things like stuff like the life straws or the filters and the filtration systems, because you're catching water, maybe rainwater catchment systems, and trying to filter it. Now, if you're talking, I'm going to put up water for a long time, you need to look at stuff like legacy food storage, like they carry water containers. And don't just buy anything to hold your water. If you're buying jugs or you're buying water bottled water from like Walmart or a grocery store, those will last anywhere from 3 to 6 months or 6 to 12 months, depending on what kind of bottles you're buying. There's nothing wrong with taking some of your reusable glassware and using this also for your water storage. But you need to have water purification tablets. You need to have these big water jugs. Now, I can't show you any of those because those are not in this room, but I'll show you a picture of some right here. And what you want to do is buy them based on what's best for you. They have what they call water storage bricks. They're a little bit more expensive, but they're stackable. They have bigger jugs. The bigger the jug that is just a simple jug is going to be a little bit more economical than if you are looking for certain style settings to make them more compact. So if you can fit a 10, 20, 30, 40 gallon water container somewhere, over time that's going to be cheaper than having to buy little smaller versions to stack. But in our world that we live in smaller areas, or we may live in apartments, or we may live in a very controlled element, or we can't, our floors, if we're conventional, we can't, put a heavy 50 gallon water drum on there because of the weight. So you may look at some water storage elements such as bottled water or gallon waters. Put those in a little bit better quality food grade plastic, or put those in different elements if you can. I challenge you not to always use the water that is just simply in plastic jugs or plastic water bottles, because they're not made to last for long-term storage. They're meant for you to utilize quicker, so it's a cheaper plastic. If that is all you have, long as you have water, you can always boil it, you can always purify it. Put up water and making sure you can slide it under beds. I would challenge you to look towards water and food grade storage like those ones I showed you earlier. It's key to make sure you put water up. Without water, food is not going to be too helpful. You have to have water, and water storage is for long term. Have things like the filtrations, the purifications. We did a whole video on water. Make sure you pay attention to that. Boiling water, of course, is the best, but you need to watch that if you have not watched that, to go back and make sure you're doing all you can for water. Number 9 is shelving. Everything that we do is all about organization and shelving. We buy stackable buckets. We buy stackable containers. We buy everything that we can to fit on shelves, because we want to make sure that we can put as much on shelves as possible. So all around this room, and if you want to go back and look at a lot of those shelves, you can watch those 2 prepping videos. I will link both of those kind of like prepping tours and those pantry tours down below. But putting up food on shelves is a good thing. Now here's where I want to kind of hone in on ceiling shelves, because a lot of times people say, oh, I don't have room because I have this I have to use, I have to put this for books, I have to do this for school, I have to do this for TVs, I have to do this for computers. That's okay. You need to build ceiling shelves. Now what I mean is right at your roof line. So you have an 8-foot ceiling or a 10-foot ceiling, or bigger or taller or whatever it is. Get you some shelving boards. Put you some shelving anchors in the wall to hold those boards, because you don't want them to fall, because then you've wasted all that time and all that money, and also all the food, because they're probably going to bust if they're in the glass. But you put them a foot or 2 below your ceiling level. No one is using that space. It's a cubicle area such as a room. No one is using a foot away from your molding or a foot away from your ceiling. So like for instance right here, this is a lean-to roof, but say for instance this is a flat roof. We may go and put a shelf 1 foot below the ceiling line, so then I can stack as much food as I want to around the edge of a room. It is a good practice. People say a lot of times that's the biggest thing. Oh, I can't store all this food because I don't have room. Then you go and you build shelves everywhere you can. We have shelves in every closet. We have shelves in every room, but then we also have rooms where we can't actually access that shelf without a step stool ladder, especially my wife, because she's a little bit shorter. But it's one of those things where it doesn't have to be accessed all the time. This is long-term food storage. So you may put those things up there and they may sit there for 6 to 8 months or 10 months or 12 months or even longer, depending on what's there. And that way it's out of the way, but it keeps it to where you can always access it if you need it. Also, by those high shelves, that means you won't always go into your pantry supply and your stockpile. You'll want to just go buy it and keep those for safekeeping up there. High shelves, building them 1 foot off the ceiling, is another great way of food safety and food security to last longer. A little bit more neater, tidier, to keep it away from the areas that you're having to use so much. Number 10 is what I would say is probably the minimalist approach to all of this. Now, I know people say, well, I don't want to store in plastic. I don't want to store in anything like that. That's okay. However, food grade plastic and MYLAR bags are not bad, and I think that's going to be the best ways to keep food for a long time. Now, rotation is key, so if you're not worried about 25, 30 year supply stuff, maybe just have a little food grade stuff or a little, freeze dried foods to last that long. But you may be rotating more. So, having things in glass and having a lot more canned foods is better for you. That's okay. But I want to talk about number 10. Number 10 is paper sacks or cardboard sacks. Now, this is not something that I would put a lot of food in for a long term. However, if you're storing things like salt, if you're storing things like pickling lime, if you're storing things like charcoal, things that animals tend to not want to nestle in or bugs don't want to eat or get into is not bad for paper or cardboard sacks. Truthfully, if I can leave it in paper or cardboard sacks, I actually want to, especially when it comes to our salts and our pickling limes and things like that, because it's not a big deal. Same way with charcoal. We keep our charcoal in paper sacks and making sure that we can always use the cardboard or the paper to help light the charcoal. But there's nothing wrong with that. So making sure you have some kind of paper sacks or cardboard bags, that's good to have, but just make sure what you're putting in it is not as much about a food item. It may be something in preservation. It may be something like the charcoal. It may be little pieces of wood. It may be where you keep things that are not food and edible, but it's a way that you can safely store something for a long time. So cardboard sacks or paper sacks, if you're using that, a lot of times groceries or better grocery qualities will have that. You can also turn around and use those in compost after you use them in storage. So it's again another way to recycle some of those ways that you can hold your food or your typical stockpile for safety. Well guys, I hope this video helped. This is 10 ways that we can put up food for a long-term storage. We're a family of 8, so our goal is always to make sure that we are taking care of our family and putting up food for the long haul. Some of this food we purchase because it might be things like rice and flour, things we can't grow, oats. But then a lot of this freeze-dried food and a lot of these foods that's in these containers, it's all food off our grounds that we can turn around, grow, freeze-dry, or dehydrate and put up for long-term to make sure we're getting the best quality food for the longest amount of time, to make sure we're not dependent on having to go buy it. Because when it comes down to it, and we're kind of in a situation where we're in chaos and collapse, the last thing I want to do is put myself or my family in jeopardy to have to go out and search for food when we have a lot here. Having a lot of food that's not stored properly is going to have a mess and have a lot of vermin and varmints that you have to deal with. Having a lot of food stored properly is key. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Ultimately, all peace goes by living for Jesus. We hope that you are finding comfort in a terrible situation in our world by leaning on Him. Guys, thank you so much for watching. God bless. Happy homesteading, y'all.